let's get started. For those of you who don't know me, welcome. Thank you for showing up. My name is George Paraso. I am the founder of Brainstream Creative, and I serve on the board of the Michigan Production Alliance. I've known Mark for several years now at this point, and I've recognized some of your faces. But Mark and I were talking earlier today, probably like just after 1 o'clock, and we were just talking about how we with our businesses navigating something we don't even can't get our heads around at this particular second. And I realized that I knew somebody I could potentially talk to about some of this, and I'm going to introduce him in a minute. But what's happened is the passage of this CARES Act, we have had like $2.2 trillion has been made available to help businesses and business owners and really any of the citizens as a result of this pandemic. Specifically, what I think is interesting and relevant to our current situation is that there's financial assistance for freelancers, people that wouldn't traditionally qualify for unemployment will have access to some assistance. I don't know how to get there, but I did find that out. And then finally, 350, this is the big number here, $350 billion has been earmarked for small business loans. Each business can get up to $10 million. I wonder how I get my hands on $10 million. But what it also boils down to is that portions or all of these loans can be forgiven under certain conditions. And I'm not going to get into that, go into the weeds too much. What I do want to do is introduce you to Spencer Field. Spencer Field is a small business advisor for the Small Business Development Center of Michigan. Our tax money goes to fund this organization, and Spencer is one of the astute people that I've met over and that I've gotten to know over the years as someone who really cares about the local economy, really cares about local and small businesses, and he goes to bat for them every day in so many different ways that he's earned my trust significantly. And I appreciate you making time on such short notice to present. And so with that, I'm going to leave it to you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Spencer. You all pay my salary, so thank you for doing that. I very much appreciate that on a pretty regular basis. Not like most people have an option there, but we could make it a little bit more painful. So for those of you who don't know, the Michigan SBDC is a taxpayer-funded business consulting firm. So you pay your taxes. A part of that taxes goes to our team of 75 consultants all throughout the state of Michigan. And then it's our job to help you grow your businesses through a variety of things. Most of that is one-on-one business consulting. We help people do.
I'm sorry, Spencer, you're breaking up, or somebody's breaking us up here.
Yeah, let's go ahead and
Can we mute if you guys aren't talking? Can we just?
Yeah, let's do that. Everybody mute who's not talking, please.
All right, looks like we have mutes on across the board. All right, so as I was saying, we help businesses do all sorts of things here in the state of Michigan. We help people export to Ukraine, understand financials, hire people, engage with the federal government if you want to do federal contract work, and you name it, we've probably done it. We work with about 6,000 businesses a year, so we're usually pretty busy. And during this entire process, the federal government has tasked us here in the state of Michigan to be doing education and really to be helping people fill out paperwork and make sure you have access to these funds, as well as like mitigating any potential problems that come up in the process. So our team is positioned here to do that. We do that mostly one-on-one. So we've had 3 hours to put together this presentation. So hopefully you'll get some ideas. My goal is to keep it about 10 or 15 minutes long, giving you a real starting point to the conversation, and let's move into Q&A. A couple things to know is that this situation is constantly evolving. What is true tonight will not be true tomorrow morning. The information never stands still. So I'm going to tell you what I know now. If you ask me again on Monday morning, this will be a totally different story. So you'll have to keep yourself educated and ask as well. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Give me some nods if you're able to see my screen. All right, seeing a yes. Okay, so let's start over here.
I'm going to interrupt real briefly, though. You did provide me a link that you've been curating with various resources, and I'm going to share that with everybody at the end of this meeting.
Yes, please do. So all these resources can be sent to you. This is just a couple things to know. So starting points here, there are grants and there are loans. The basics, as everybody know, are grants you get to keep, loans you have to pay back in a certain amount of time. One thing that is often comes up is, Spencer, I don't really know how much money I need. I don't know how bad this is going to be. I don't know how long it's going to be. I don't know how to conserve my cash. Do I fire everybody right now? And those are all really big, important questions, which have really large ramifications on your business. So our team put together a recorded webinar, which you're able to watch, about the first 5 things you want to do from a business perspective. And we call that navigating the cash flow crunch, and specifically negative cash flow. So I'd recommend that if you're thinking about taking next steps with your business as far as a funding perspective goes, you would watch that webinar. And what you're really looking to do is put together what's called a cash flow analysis. And all you're doing is analyzing any money that you expect to come in, and then analyzing how much money you expect to go out, and figuring out if that's in the red. And if it's in the red, then we can figure out what to do with it. But to begin with, you don't want to just start applying for everything left, right, and down the center. Start by really figuring out what is that red number, how big is the hole you need to fill, and we'll figure it out from there. So first step, action item, if you're taking notes, cash flow analysis. All right, so there's stuff happening all over the board. There's happening at the federal level, the state level, and the local level. So we're going to break those down. So we're going to start here at the federal level. 2 big things happening at the federal level. So the first one is that the SBA has started giving out what are called economic injury disaster relief loans. And these are loans. They are not grants. You have to pay them back. They can be up to $2 million, and they're lent at 3.75% interest rate. However, about 50% of the loan applications have been turned down currently. And the biggest reason for that has been credit. And the entire process is overloaded. It's like an 8-week time period before you would even get cash if everything was 100% perfect, which it probably won't be when you apply. So if you're looking for a loan, these EIDL loans from the federal government are one option. And I have all sorts of information about how exactly you submit it, but we won't go into all of that today unless somebody has a couple of questions on that. So item number 1, federal EIDL loans. The second thing is the CARES Act. So the CARES Act was recently passed and is the thing which everybody has been diving into recently. So a couple of things to know about the CARES Act. There's this great graphic which NPR put out that I wanted to share with you here of how the money is going to be spent over here. So we have education, big corporations, individuals, state and local governments, public health, and small businesses here. So what you probably care about in this conversation is going to be the small businesses and the individual payments. So you've probably heard any taxpayer in the year 2018, 2019 is expected to get a $1,200 check sent to them plus more for children. And that's really what's happening with the individual loans. And then within the government and small business loans, there's funding for unemployment. And what shifted is that for anyone who's a freelancer, typically you were just kind of out of luck with this entire process. But there's been special information written in regarding freelancers to give special provisions that you might not need. Now, the interesting part is this $377 billion hasn't fully been figured out everything which we're going to do with it. So the bureaucracy has now been told there's this money, and people all over the country are splicing up who gets it and how they get it, and is it loans and all of that whatnot. So this is still an evolving block down here, but know that there are 2 things at that federal level which is the EIDL and the CARES Act. More information to come on the CARES Act. There is on the link that we'll send you several articles about what's in the CARES Act, how you apply for stuff in the CARES Act, all that detail that you might want to walk through. But there's the federal government. All right, so let's move over here now to the state government. So the state of Michigan is also doing something. It starts here with the Michigan Economic Development Corporation. They announced that they're going to give out $20 million, $10 million in loans, and $10 million in grants. Now, they did that at the beginning of the week, and everybody has been yelling, well, how is it that we get that money? How's that going to be divided up? So the state of Michigan gave the MEDC $20 million. The MEDC then splits that money up into 15 economic development corporations. And if you want to know which economic development corporation you're under, it's divided by county. There's a link here as well as on the website that we'll send you. Many people in the greater Ann Arbor area will be under Ann Arbor Spark, and we'll be engaging in that. Now, there's a couple things to think about here. So it's $20 million for the entire state of Michigan. That is for the big businesses and the little businesses. There's already earmarking happening, so the $20 million is already being whittled down to be less than $20 million. I'm going to throw out the number $15 million might be open for people to engage with. That means that we're going to take that $15 million, split it up over 15 different economic development corporations, and half of that will be loans and half of that will be grants. So I know that Ann Arbor Spark covers something like 50,000 businesses in its geographical area, which means that 50,000 businesses are vying for, give or take, $1 million worth of funding. So the numbers are really kind of difficult to look at there. If you think about how that money might get to your business and how you might be engaging with that process. So there is money, both grants and loans at the state level. To figure out exactly how that's going to work, you're going to have to talk to your individual economic development corporation. I'd be glad to help you find your specific one. It's divided by county, but just know that there's $20 million and a lot of businesses, so not a lot to spare, and you'll probably want to move pretty quickly on that. All right, most finally, we have local businesses, and this is where a lot of people are getting their first toe in the door. So as we just zoom out here for a minute, when we look at what people are trying to do, if you are a big corporation, if you have more than 500 employees and you're a massive steel manufacturer, you're probably going to be looking at the federal government. That's probably where you're going to be getting your loans. Now, if you're a medium-sized business, maybe you have 100 to 500 employees, the state of Michigan is probably where you're going to be getting your money from. If you're a freelancer or a relatively small LLC or sole prop, something along that line, you're most likely to get money from the local government. Now, not every local government has launched their own things, and this is a massive patchwork of what's happening throughout the entire state. Our team at the SBDC covers the entire state of Michigan, and so we are starting to collect individual funding groups as they pop up. So individual cities are doing things, townships are doing things, counties are doing things, regions are doing things. So it's this really complicated patchwork of what's out there. The four big ones that I'm aware of currently are the Jackson area, Oakland County, Washtenaw County, and then Detroit area stabilization fund. So these are all mostly grant-related programs that you can get. So I know here in Washtenaw County, there is $100,000, which is going to be given out to businesses, and $2,500 block grants. They are grants, they are not loans. You have to apply online, and the application is relatively simple to go through that. Before the program even launched, so when it was just in beta testing, they had something like 56 applications, and as it became public, there are now over 1,000 applications, and they're constantly rolling out on a regular basis. So if you think there's $100,000, you divide that by $2,500, there's not a lot of funds available. There's a limited number of grants. So we're expecting that money to grow as part of the process. We think that will turn that $100,000 into maybe a couple $100,000, but limitations all across the board as far as this go. In addition, know that you and every other business, almost every other business in the country, is struggling hardcore. So there's a lot of people competing for these funds, which means that if you're applying for something, you need to do it correctly and you need to do it quickly, because if you don't, you might get left in the cold as part of that. And I would also highly recommend avoiding the knight in shining armor approach, in that I would not recommend that you expect some governmental agency to swoop in and help you with the funding perspective. When we look at how fast they've been moving, it's been really slow so far. So do not build your next step plan based on funding from these organizations in the short term, at least, because it'll be challenging to get that money. Instead, you really need to work on that cash flow analysis like we talked about, and moving things out. So let's talk about some potential next steps you can get, and then I want to give you a little bit more information regarding the CARES Act and how that affects freelancers, because I think that might be particularly relevant for this conversation. So the first thing is our entire team has put together a webinar specifically targeted for freelancers, which will be happening next week or was recently recorded. There will be a link on the website if you'd like to watch more of that. The webinar is a great way to see information fully targeted at freelancers, not just businesses in general. When it comes to the freelancers, this article is the most helpful that I found the article to be. So this is from the National Writers Union, and it was written well because it was put together by the National Writers Union, surprisingly enough. So it's pretty interesting, and you can go ahead and read through that. I'll just summarize it for you right now, in that you have to be eligible, and the eligibility requirements are relatively easy. There's nothing crazy on there. You'll probably qualify. Now, the interesting part about this is the benefits here. So the benefits are similar to the benefits that you might get through unemployment, and it's dependent upon your state and how it's calculated and all that jazz. But this right here is the number to be looking at. The PUA will have a minimum benefit that is equal to 1/2 the state's average weekly unemployment benefit, which is $190 per week. So not a massive amount of money is what the minimum. And in addition to that, it's 1/2 the state's average weekly UI benefit. So it's not equal to full unemployment benefits. It's 1/2 of what the unemployment benefits are for the state. So this money will be coming out through the unemployment office here in the state of Michigan. It's up to the state of Michigan to decide what they want the process to be as far as the paperwork goes. It's going to be state by state. I was listening to a presentation by the Lieutenant Governor on Friday. He said that they are going to be very open with these funds. They're going to do their best to make them as accessible as possible. But again, it's 1/2 of the state's average. You have to apply for it. The UI office is fully overloaded, so we want to be cautious about that process. All right, I'm almost done talking, and then we can take questions. So the first thing would be stay informed about this entire process. Lots of places to go. The link that we will send you will be to a landing page that I have just been created and have been curating resources on. These websites here, these first 4 websites, are all high-powered information, which are all also being updated on a regular basis. So as you want to see how the process is evolving, check out these individual websites. I'll do my best to keep this one updated, but there's constantly things happening. So you'll see like the Jackson location isn't even listed here because that just rolled out as of relatively recently here. So keep yourself informed. There is nobody who can do this for you but yourself. So keep yourself educated. And then if you'd like to set up a one-on-one conversation with me, you are legally entitled to do that. And I would be glad to have that conversation because you have paid for it with your taxpayer dollars. If you're not in the geographical area I cover, I can still work with you, or I can help you find a consultant in your area because there are, like I mentioned, 75 consultants all across the state of Michigan, and all of them are paid for by your taxpayer dollars to help you make a plan. And then an item which is really back at the start is really looking at creating that negative cash flow. I think when we have ideas in our head, I'm going to jump back to me here. When we have ideas in our head, they are like pinballs, and they pinball all over our head. And especially when they're fear-based, they just destroy and rip apart and keep us up at night. So what we need to do is take the pinball and trap it in an Excel sheet, and then we can take action based on that. So as you're thinking about what can you be doing right after you hang up from this, I would say create a negative cash flow, or just create a cash flow. Hope it's not negative, but if it is negative, let's get a very clear idea of how much money we have before we're in big trouble, and then figure out what we're going to be doing based on that. All right, question time. Anybody have any questions for me? Feel free to either chat them in. I have the chat box open. Apparently Dave has beer, and John would like some beer. So Dave, if you would care to share, John would prefer to have some, or feel free to unmute yourself and ask me as well.
Dave doesn't want to share that beer.
No. Well,
so for freelancers, so you've got the freelancers, 1099 freelancers, and you've got small business owners here.
yes.
Small business owners who have a big investment in equipment, may have lease payments to make, that sort of thing. 8 weeks, you're suggesting, if they get on this grant program, maybe.
Yeah. So a lot of this is we're not sure. It's all new. Like the Small Business Administration has quite honestly had a pretty aggressive bungle job in the last week, launching things and taking them down and crashing portals and all sorts of whatnot. It's been a nightmare even for big, massive manufacturers, which gross $500 million a year. It's been difficult for their accounting team. So if you're a freelancer or a small business owner, you have some potential debt, or you're leasing equipment, a couple things that I would highlight to do. Again, starting with really documenting that process and getting a big, clear idea of what you're doing. Then taking any cash which is going out the door, personal cash and professional cash, and put it into 3 buckets. So any payment you're making over the next 90 days, put it into 3 buckets. So stuff you absolutely have to do if you're a business. Payroll, absolutely have to do it, no questions asked. Insurance, got to keep that up, no questions asked. If you're a person, food, no questions asked, absolutely have to do it. B would be things that you would like to keep paying for, but you might not need to keep paying for. And then C are things like unsecured debt, such as credit card debt or your mortgage or those types of things. And those we want to prioritize. Then reach out to any one of your funders. So if you have credit card debt, reach out to American Express. Say, listen, I'm having a negative cash flow. It's my understanding that I can request delay of payment. Could you tell me a little bit more about that? So I have had dozens of clients reach out to credit card companies, mortgage companies, any other type of debt company, and say, listen, we're having a significant issue with cash. What can we do? And put the ball in their court. And I've had clients report back that that people have said, we're gonna hold your mortgage payment for 90 days, just right off the bat. But it is your responsibility to reach out to them. They're not going to reach out to you, and ask how you can work on this relationship together. And then finally, and then George, over to you, the freelance funding. If you're a small business, and you can be a sole proprietor. So if you just stand up and you are a mic guy, and you do a couple projects a month or whatever, you don't have a LLC or something like that, you are still considered a business owner. You own what's called a sole proprietorship. You can apply for grants and loans and those types of things, but know that the more established businesses are going to be preferred over you most likely. So you can still do it, but I would focus on those Michigan-based things as well. George, and then there's a great comment from Zach in the chat box if everybody wants to pop that open.
So yeah, real quick. I mean, I think one thing I did as soon as everything started shutting down and I'd get calls that projects were postponed,
Yep.
as in this kind of is in line with what Spencer's talking about. I looked at one of my software service providers and I said, guys, you know, I have the subscription going. I want to hang on to it, but you know, I can't, the next 3 months look pretty bleak here, you know, can you help me out? And they gave me, and I can't, in all fairness, I'm not going to name the software provider, but they gave me like 3 months credit for the program, just like, here you go. And I'm like, sweet. So I think one thing I like that Spencer points out is just ask, you know, and you can't lose anything by asking.
Yep. When it comes to Zach, to answer your questions, the question is, so as a freelancer, we would get 1/2 the state minimum unemployment via the CARES Act, and the federal government will add $600 to that. So there's two different things happening there. So the first one is every individual in the country outside of the unemployment office is supposedly going to get a $1,200 check mailed to them or direct deposited, or however that process is actually going to work. And as an individual citizen who has paid taxes, it will not be halved by anything. It's just the very fact that you are a citizen to that. In addition, you'll be able to apply, supposedly, depending on how the state of Michigan does this. We don't know yet. We're hoping that you, as freelancers, even if you're not an employee, you haven't been fired, but as a freelancer, you can apply to the state of Michigan unemployment office and say, I'm a freelancer, I have become unemployed, I would please like to draw unemployment benefits as if I had been an employee. Will you help me with that? And the CARES Act says that the state of Michigan can make the decision, but what they're probably going to say is, yes, as a freelancer, if you can prove that you are a freelancer, I'm sure they'll create a form for it, that if you prove you're a freelancer, we will give you unemployment benefits, but those unemployment benefits will be half of what an employee would get. Currently is my understanding to that question.
Is that done through Leo?
It will be done through the Michigan Unemployment Office, the UIA office, and you can.
And Leo's their online service.
Okay, I'm not familiar with their online service, so it sounds like it's probably Leo. You cannot apply yet as a freelancer because the state of Michigan hasn't passed the legislation it will need to pass to change the way that UIA works. However, they're expected to do that in the next week, and if you head over to their website, I would be willing to bet they have a register to learn more information sign up page there.
Okay.
You can't apply yet. Hopefully you can in the next one. Here, Steve,
you should if you haven't yet, everybody should go make their unemployment account. It took me 5 days to just get the website to work to make the account and get it accepted. So it's a pretty long process.
Yeah, great point, John. Another thing to consider when we're talking about these SBA loans, I have some clients which have lots of information that they were submitting. They have a CFO who runs all their finances. They were applying, they were filling out all the forms online. They saved them. They came back the next day, and the SBA had totally deleted the entire part of the website and replaced it with a new application. So whenever you're doing this process, know that the systems are completely and totally overwhelmed from a technical perspective. There's bandwidth issues. There's sites crashing left, right, and down the center. So if you're able to apply in paper, like I'm the young guy, like I love my technology, but if I was doing this, I would be doing it in paper because it's less likely to crash. And if you're doing it online, consider doing it during a low volume time, such as late at night or early in the morning. Trying to do it between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. will probably make your life even more difficult. But John,
sorry to interrupt. They've also instituted a alphabetical claim application process. A through L is one day, and the rest are in other days.
Yeah, I think that's another way which they're trying to break it up. That has been before the freelancers have been added to the process, so I wouldn't be surprised if they then break it up into more days. So kind of just re-underlining that shining armor thing. I have talked to so many people who are just like, I'm going to hold on by my fingernails until somebody shows up and gets me a grant, and then we'll be good to go. That's the knight in shining armor might show up. He might show up in 8 weeks, and he might step on your fingers instead of giving you a hand up. So there is lots of things that you can pursue, but have a plan, make sure it's written, and if you need help, let me know, and we can work on that together. I was just going to add here, Steve had a great comment. He said Ford gave him 3 months of no payments that will be added to the end of 7 vehicles, and they barely asked. So quite often I work with business owners, and in this last week, which has been a very painful week for a lot of people who know that they owe debt, know that they want to honor that debt, know that they want to care for that debt and be reasonable people and steward that.
I have a comment. This is Sue with hi everybody.
How's it going?
I'm waving. Hi. Just so you guys know, if you do go on the unemployment website and then it kicks you off after you set up an account, when you go to log back in, likely you're going to get a message saying that your account's not valid. Don't let that dissuade you. Wait a couple hours because they're
like in 30 minutes. I just got home.
Between
Hey guys, if you're not talking, can you please mute yourself?
getting confirmed. Does that make sense?
Makes sense to me. Yeah. So the idea being, if you get talked off the website, go back then again shortly because you might be able to access it again.
And on another note for bills, I don't know if you've contacted like your mortgage companies. A lot of mortgage companies are doing what's called a pause, where they'll pause your payments and just put the next 3 months. They'll just put it on the end and not do any accrued interest. Mine isn't. It's Mr. Cooper, and it sucks. And we've been online shaming them. So please join us. But check your mortgage companies because I know that Wells Fargo's doing it. Quicken Loans is doing it. There's a couple others, but we're all in this together. So.
Yeah, and so most of these businesses or these lenders have a stock answer they'll give you over the phone. They had some conference call with all their reps and said, if somebody calls in, tell them this answer. So if you just call and just ask, they will probably roll out whatever stock answer that they've been given, and that will probably be a relatively good answer. If you have a mortgage, I'm not a personal financial advisor, so take everything I say regarding personal finances with a grain of salt. If you have a personal mortgage and you're not able to get payments paused, now might be an opportune time to look at refinancing it, a possibility as well. And then as part of that refinance, you can look at doing a HELOC and pulling funds back out of the equity of your house to fund yourself personally. Been working with a lot of businesses which need cash literally today to make their payroll or something along that line. And oftentimes the fastest way to do that is with a secured loan. So working with your lender, being that your bank or some other SBA funder, to have access to get that money out through a secured loan is usually the quickest way to do that because federal funds are unlikely to be moving quickly.
So real quick, I think Daniel had a question.
Yeah, I just had a quick question. Spencer, do we have any date for when the Freelancer application may possibly be live?
Yeah, great question. So the way that the process works is the federal government had to pass the CARES Act. That's been passed. Now the state of Michigan needs to change the rules for the unemployment insurance office. They haven't done that yet. They haven't announced what the rules will be. So I was having on a brief with the lieutenant governor on Friday of last week. They expected the CARES Act to pass. They're already working on the rule changes, which will allow freelancers to apply, and they're hoping to have it live by next Friday, but they do not have a actual date that will be available. But they are working on it. Supposedly that will be a very aggressive application process. They're going to prioritize freelancers in some way, and they are hoping to do that quickly, but no specific date is available.
Okay, and Spencer, can I ask a follow-up question to that?
Yep.
So I'm technically employed by my dad's LLC, but I also then do a lot of my work just freelancing as a producer, videographer. And so can I still apply for the freelancer thing even if I'm technically still employed through a LLC?
Yeah, it's a great question. So what that really boils down to is when you were paid through the LLC, if you were paid through a payroll company or some other way, then that income was reported to the unemployment office, and then the unemployment office accrues credits based on the amount of money which has been spent, and then the credits expire after so many quarters and yada, yada, yada. So the answer to that is it depends on how much you have been paid and when you have been paid. And the only person who can answer how many credits have accrued and what your eligibility is would be the UIA as part of that office. Just as a note, if you're able to claim unemployment as an employee, that will be better than claiming unemployment as a freelancer, as freelancers are only entitled to 50% of what employees are entitled to. So you might call them up, explain the situation, and ask what your current eligibility is between the two. But you'll want to do employee if you can, depending on how all the credits work.
Okay. Yeah, because I had a big project that was literally going to begin almost right as COVID-19 hit, and I was completely working. Everything has been indefinitely postponed or might even be canceled. I have nothing right now.
Yeah, and so do you have an LLC in addition to the LLC that you're an employee of?
No, I don't. I just run everything through Crystal Creek Media LLC, which is my dad's company. Just it makes it easier that it's less accounting.
Yeah. So from a perspective of what you can look at doing, going back to our conversation. So number one, looking at your personal finances and then any expenses the business has, creating a written net cash flow analysis, and then deciding what the big gap is that you're going to be having, prioritizing all of your spending that will be happening over the next 90 days and dividing those into the buckets that we talked about earlier. And then you can start looking for funding. There are some grants available. The one which is probably most applicable in your situation is as you're in Washtenaw County. Washtenaw County has a $2,500 grant for small businesses, which can prove they were harmed by COVID-19. You can probably pretty easily prove you were harmed by COVID-19. And then you would just have to decide if that's you as an individual who was, or the LLC that is. If that's up for an interpretation, interpret it in the words of the LLC was harmed, not you were harmed personally. And then you can apply for that and hopefully get $2,500, which isn't much, but it's better than $0.
There's some other things on. I know what grant you're talking about, and there are some other things around that make it really difficult to qualify for.
Yeah, and that's, again, you'll have to look at that process, and then again, just staying informed on how everything's evolving, because we expect more grants to be launching. There's one, getting ready in Livingston County. There's all sorts of stuff bubbling in Detroit, and not everybody is talking to one another. So this is a lot of, we're just watching the landscape, seeing what funding becomes available, trying to aggregate all of that. But quite honestly, if you are just paying attention to your local chamber, your local DDA, your local county, your local news, you very well could know more about what's being offered in your local area than I will be. You'll know faster than I do. I'll probably find out eventually. When it comes to the state and federal perspectives, however, for now, don't expect anything else from the federal government. The SBA loans, which are those economic injury disaster relief loans, are a big thing potentially. And then the CARES Act being both a personal funds, the UIA for unemployment, and then that small business block, which will probably be broken into loans as well. I doubt there'll be grants there. You have the MEDC money again, $20 million, 10 grant, 10 loan. There might be grants there, but if you're a freelancer or a small company, you're most likely to get funding from a local fund group, less likely from federal and state.
So now, hang on a second, because I did read something, and this was part of the CARES Act summary, was that $350 billion was going to small businesses. And if they met certain, and I mean as loan, right? And that if they met certain criteria, like they kept their employees on the payroll, they were paying the rent, they were at least keeping their workers on board through the end of June, yeah, that these loans could be forgiven.
Yeah, so the way that that process works is first understand the federal government calls a small business anything less than 500 employees. So when we think small, we might think mom and pop. When the federal government thinks small, it thinks anything less than 500 employees is small. So we're expecting a lot of those funds to go to businesses which have hundreds of employees,
Sure.
because keeping them on is a really important part of, you know, economic stability and part of that.
I mean, if that's the case, and I'm not trying to make a political statement or anything, but 350 doesn't sound like a really big number.
No, it's not at all. And so when we think about what's going to be accessible to what we might call micro businesses, 1 employee to 10 employees, or maybe we kind of extend that to the freelancer individual LLC perspective, there is not anywhere close to $350 million available to micro businesses. It might be 30/10th of that. It might be something a little bit more than that. I don't know how much exactly that is. I doubt anybody knows the full amount, but it's not going to be massive. When it comes, I do want to talk, thank you for bringing that up, about the forgivability side to this. So the way that I'm currently reading it, and again, it's still evolving, we don't know how it's going to work, is the federal government is going to give money to banks, and they're going to earmark that money to lend to small businesses. You then have to apply for that money through a bank, and then that's an entire application process, which will probably follow a standard small business or SBA loan, which, just shameless plug, our team last year did something like $200 million worth of capital formation. A lot of that was through SBA loans, so we kind of know the process pretty well, and we'd be glad to help if you want to go through that. Once you apply through the bank, then the bank will vet you. They'll send your paperwork to the federal government. The federal government will vet you. All of this will 100% take weeks. And then if you are vetted by both organizations, then you might receive the funds from the bank and you'll have to repay the bank. Now the question becomes regarding forgivability. It might happen. It might not happen. We don't know what you actually need to do. And from my personal interpretation, from what I've seen with a lot of politicians doing recently, they're using this as a way to kind of hang a carrot in front of small business owners to keep their employees on. They're saying, you have to keep your employees on, you have to keep your employees on. And if you do, we'll forgive this loan potentially. But nobody's actually put that in writing.
Oh, that's...
And so personal interpretation is it might be a bit of a carrot to make sure that you don't lay people off and thus, you know, their ratings drop further. But again, the situation's evolving. Hopefully we'll know what it actually looks like shortly, maybe, and we'll be able to take more specific next steps from there. As a member of the SBDC, which is funded through the state and federal government, I work directly with the SBA, and then we work with our state reps and state legislators, the governor's office, the entire process. And our entire team has been clamoring very loudly to get clear, accurate information so that you, as business owners and as somebody who owns a business myself, can make actual decisions, because this whole we don't know, it depends, it's evolving, just makes it really hard to actually make any decisions. Right. So we're fighting for clarity, but as of now, it doesn't happen. So don't take out a loan and think it's going to be forgiven. It may or may not be forgiven. And if you want some of that money, it's probably going to be pretty small, and it will go through banks, which means that you need to have your financial situation in order. 3 years of tax returns, 3 years of your profit and loss statements, all of that jazz. You'll have to look at your, you know, personal credit. You'll have to sign for it personally, all of that jazz.
Well, that's good to know. It's good to get at least a little bit of, I mean, you're reinforcing what I was already thinking about that whole thing. So cool.
Yeah, we'll find out.
Who else has a question? Don't be shy.
I can't bite you. I have to follow social distancing rules.